Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Elise is off tonight. A pilot program for a weapons detection system recommended by district officials in the Green Bay Area Public School District is rejected tonight by a 5-2 vote by the Board of Education. This comes after months of discussion and concerns being expressed about the need to improve school safety and security. Just 2 weeks ago, the board pushed back its vote on adding the weapon detection system due to concerns about effectiveness and cost. Had the board given the pilot program a green light, each of the high schools would undergo a 2 to 4 week trial to see how well those systems worked. As we previously reported, much of the discussion began after a student brought a loaded gun to Preble High School back in September of this year. Board President James Lyerly was one of the 2 board members who voted for the pilot program, but he says not everybody on the board was convinced, since the system can't be relied upon as the sole solution to preventing weapons on school campuses.
Don't think the board is convinced that these devices right now will do that for us without some really comprehensive changes to the entire security strategy around our schools.
According to district officials, some of the drawbacks of having that system in place would have been false positives and negatives, bottlenecking at the entrance, plus additional staffing requirements.